Chapter 11. "Take a hold of your lead halter there, Morgan, and calm down," Pat advised with some sharpness. "Since when have we done anything worse than lending you a hand?" Still and alert, Ray seemed to be searching for flaws in that argument. "Well, I ain't got no written guarantees from you," he growled defensively. "Could be Powder Valley deputies for all I've heard. You're acting that way in the past, and I can't think of a better reason right now that you be coming over here so far. You ain't taking me back." Sam snorted explosively at this obtuse stand, and Pat shook his head impatiently. "You couldn't be more wrong, boy. Give us some credit, wouldn't you?" Morgan stared. "Are you telling me you ain't interested in my movements after grabbing me this way?" "If you mean, are we interested in making you go anywhere you don't want to go? No," Pat assured him. "I doubt if you're even wanted over there in Powder Valley, as a matter of fact. I didn't bother to inquire before I come away, but I got the impression from Sheriff Lawler that he had decided to leave well enough alone." Ray took a deep breath. "Well, how could he know what actually happened there? Or any of you?" he demanded huskily with hope. "You're forgetting old Pop Brenner," Ezra told him, grinning. "Miller got Pop in the shoulder, but he could still talk. Have to shoot his chin off to stop him from doing that. And Pop knows who was sticking up for him and who wasn't. And don't you forget it." Morgan caught at that like a drowning man. "You telling the truth, Ezra? You give me the rest of that," he urged. "Hold on," Pat interposed. "There's plenty to be said, all right, but let's get out of Taggart's backyard here before someone comes stumbling upon us. Is there some place around where we can stick on the coffee pot and chew the rag?" Ray's reply was concession. "Well, I got a camp over there in the cottonwoods about a mile down the creek. Shouldn't be any danger of being overheard there." Sam handed back the gun that he had wrenched from Morgan's holster. "Sorry to have to rough you up," he said, "but we couldn't let you run before you knowed why we was here." Ray chuckled grimly. "Well, I'm not delaying any these days for explanations, that's a darn fact." After circling quietly about, they picked up their mounts from the dark barn while Morgan fetched his own, and once they got together again, the latter led the way out onto the flat. After a time, the faint, dark silhouettes of low hills rose against the paler sky. Morgan slowed. "There's a bank down here," he warned. "Best lead your horses down." They slid downward to find themselves on a bench of the creek bottom, shrouded by young cottonwoods and cluttered with thick brush, well screened from any observation by anyone who was not familiar with the spot. At a tiny clearing, Morgan fumbled about kneeling, and presently a tongue of flame leapt up. "Well, that's better," Salone grunted as the fire come to life. "These nights seem to be getting kind of chilly on the fingers." "Well, stuff 'em back in your pockets. It's where they generally are," Ezra retorted unfeelingly. The big fella staked the horses and then broke out the blackened coffee pot that was carried in their pack, filled it in the creek, and propped it up over the blaze. They gathered about in a prop-heeled pose and chafed their hands against the flames. "Well, suppose you let me have old Brenner's yarn," Morgan proposed finally. Pat accompanied, as best as he knew how. "Well, there's only a few facts missing, Ray, from the story as it reached Jess Lawler's ear, and those only you could supply. With them, he wouldn't have much choice but to clear you entirely." He squinted curiously across the fire at the star-crossed fella. "You can supply 'em, of course." Morgan was nodding, as if memory was busy in him. "I can all right, Stevens. if it's any of Lawler's affair. Well, it will be about Canyon City, I expect. Pat nodded to him. Jess already knows, Morgan. It happened, and you can't change that. It's better just to come clean with him. Ray assented reluctantly. Anyways, you fellas know that Miller and Apache Lang were actually behind the business. Well, I met them in the pen, Stevens, and we got kind of acquainted. They took it for granted that I was of their kind, and when they found out different, they tried to force me into their game. I have a pretty fair idea how that deal went, Pat said quietly. It would seem pretty fantastic if a man didn't know. Morgan gave him a quick look and swallowed hard. Well, it would have been fantastic if he didn't get what was behind it. I figured it out finally that Pike Taggart was telling them what to do, either for his own purposes or acting under orders. Well, that's a shrewd point, Pat broke in. Taggart is Mace Galloway's right-hand man, I take it. It is Galloway who's behind that gambling tent there in Redstone, isn't it? Must be, Stevens. Taggart, he wouldn't have the money for that. Ray was reasonably positive. I know he's been here, Galloway, I mean. He just isn't the kind to allow Pike to run a business on his own or anyone else if he can grab the profit. So you was trying to tie Taggart up to the rustling or whatever else is going on? Pat's tone was careless. Is that it, Ray? Well, he certainly is mixed up with them owl hoots, Morgan declared. I've been long enough sure of that. So that's what you was doing with Taggart there in Ute Gap, exclaimed Sam unguardedly. We thought. Ray froze up in a flash. You saw me there with him, did you? So what did you think? He rasped. Ezra's grin was disarming. Well, we thought you was playing his game, boy, he said flatly. Reckon that's what you wanted him to think, too. Small wonder if we didn't savvy the play. Morgan subsided slowly. Yeah, only I was trying to work him for information. He couldn't prevent it while he was trying his damnedest to drag me in deeper. How much did you get, listening there at his tent just now? Pat inserted carefully. Morgan shook his head. Well, there's some deal cooking, Stevens. I couldn't figure out just what. That hombre that Taggart was talking to, he ain't no Powder Valley man, and most of the talk went clean over my head. I'll bet anything it was crooked as a mesquite fence, but whatever it concerned I couldn't gather. Pat wasn't surprised. I wouldn't have thought you could get that close to Pike to hear anything at all. Do he and Galloway know that you're out here now? Ray shrugged. Well, I'm not quite that stupid. They might suspect as much, knowing that I'd pulled my freight away from the ranch. Just how much they're prepared to let me find out, of course, I couldn't say, and I haven't waited for anyone to tell me. So, just what do you know? Sam thrust at him. Well, I know there's a stock trail straight out of here from Powder Valley, Ray flashed, and a station or two along the way. The flag outfit knows all the wrinkles, too. I know that much. Ezra and Pat exchanged glances. Sure, that's where all your lazy mare stuff must be going, the red-headed growled. At least till the day that we stopped that bunch above China Springs. Using my range and my corral, Morgan nodded unemotionally. Taggart was all behind that, Stevens, breaking his neck to tie me into it. So you're returning the compliment, are you? Sam grinned. Well, it's self-defense, Sloan. I know how impossible it is to get out from under the tar brush of this country. Taggart knows it too, damn it. Give a dog a bad name and cross him off the list. That's Taggart's scheme. Can you blame me for being scared to death about it? Pat shook his head decidedly. Well, it takes brains to be scared of the right things, boy. Your mistake was figuring it already was too late. Ray stilled. Well, how do you figure that? Stevens waved a hand. Well, I've been watching you trying to brush Candace Cowan off, he said bluntly. Do you know what she's doing right now or was when we left? Morgan didn't, so Pat told him. Well, she's working away all alone out there on China Springs, Morgan, trying to hold your outfit together. Not because anyone asked her to, but because she thought it was the right thing. That's how much she thinks of you, Morgan. And if you aim to get a girl like that, they don't come any finer. You'll have to deserve her. Morgan gulped. Well, I know, Stevens. I wish she'd... He couldn't finish. He didn't really wish she'd forget him, and they both knew it. Pat led the talk to lighter topics, and they were still sipping their steaming coffee when a rattling of gravel sounded from the bank at the edge of the bench. Faint, but unmistakable, it heralded the arrival of a horse. Ezra sprang up, a lanky figure of alert concern, and even Pat and Sam looked quickly towards Morgan. He alone remained unperturbed, unless to stiffen slightly. Oh, it could only be from expectation. He did not so much as glance about him in the darkness. There was a soft thud of hooves drawn close, and a coolly ironic voice came to them from out of the shadows. Well, thought you'd welcome a visitor or two, Morgan, but it seems you're already pretty well supplied. Come on down, Euchre, Ray returned quietly. Well, there's always room for a few more, you know. 3 shadowy figures drifted up into a semicircle to sit their horses unmoving. Glancing up at the blocky, expressionless faces, Pat had little difficulty in placing these newcomers accurately enough. They were outlaws or men lingering on the fringes of outlaw activity, as were most of their hard-featured riders to be encountered in this country. Obviously the leader, the one called Euchre, stared at Pat and his friends with a bold insolence. Don't believe that I've met you fellers. Oh, that's all right. Sam was in his glory in such a situation. We're right down easy to meet. Rest your saddle there, Euchre, or just go on about your business, whichever pleases you the most. That Euchre was not quite acquainted with this brand of straight-from-the-shoulder talk, or even expected it, was plain by his casual reaction. He simply ignored it and fastened a regard upon Morgan. You ain't talking there, Ray, he pointed out softly. Ray roused himself, faintly surprised. Well, these boys, they're friends of mine, Euchre, he said hastily. I knew a lot of folks before I met you. What's got into you? Euchre eased his seat in the saddle without replying. Thus far, his 2 companions hadn't opened their mouth to say anything, and studying the cagey trio narrowly, Pat thought he had little trouble in placing them. They were free riders whom Morgan had somehow scraped acquaintance with since coming to this range, and it seemed extremely unlikely they had any connection with the flag outfit. On the contrary, it seemed more probable that they were no particularly cronies of Taggart or Galloway, and might even be aiding Morgan in his investigation of the 2. Pat took his cue from that likelihood. Euchre's playing it safe, Morgan, he observed with dry amusement. It wouldn't be that he doesn't like the Powder Valley crew very much, would it? The cool owl-hoot pinned him with a knife-like glance. What would your handle be there, friend? Well, it could be Sheriff Lawler, Pat drawled, if that's the kind of name you'd go for. "Oh, easy there, Pat," cautioned Ray a little hurriedly. "Don't be forgetting that we're all sitting ducks here. No sense in antagonizing Euchre more than any need be." Pat laughed lazily. "Oh, Euchre and his friends would have been dead ducks by this time if I had any real interest in it. We might as well understand each other while we're about it, but I haven't got any ambition enough right now to try and back that brag. What's all this about, anyhow?" From Pat's rocky tone and the raffish appearance of his partners, who watched every faintest movement about them with flat, attentive eyes, Euchre had already more or less concluded them to be an outlaw team in their own right, but he was bent on making sure. "Just take a look at their brands on their broncs over there, would you, Bent?" he said to one of his companions. Nobody said anything as the man stumbled towards the picketed animals. "Well, there's 2 bar M's, 1 flying hen coop, and a quarter circle R," he called back gruffly. Sam Sloane began to laugh. "Put that way, it might tell you something, or it might not," he began. "Hold it." Cracking like a bull snake whip, Pat's ringing voice cut in. Over his thigh, the dully glint of the barrel of his Colt was trained squarely upon Euchre's vest. "Suppose you take a look at their brands there, Ezra," he barked. "I never was one to leave a job half finished. Who knows but what Euchre might be Sheriff of Redstone traveling in disguise?" Ezra rose and took up the task. He took his time. "Well, looks like 2 barred winders and a turtle on a rock. Here I can make out," he vouched. "Anything else you want to know, Stevens? Should I take a look at their teeth?" "All right." Pat tossed his weapon up in the air, spinning, and caught it aptly and thrust it back into his holster. "Well, now that we're all satisfied about each other, should we try a little target practice?" He did not appear to care what the answer would be, but Euchre had had enough of this horseplay. "I'm willing to agree now you got private business, Morgan," he said gruffly. "Maybe we'll see you later." Pat waited until the outlaws unhurriedly turned their horses and pulled out. "Just who are your new friends there, Ray?" he queried softly. Ray was obviously embarrassed. "I met them at a bar, Stevens, and I'm not fooling about what they are, but they was always square with me." Pat watched him struggle with the words and then smiled. "Oh, I'm not above using whatever tool comes ready to hand myself," he said. "Euchre must have been giving you a little hand around, hasn't he?" "Well, he was showing me around Bluestem Valley," Morgan acknowledged. Not that there's much to see." "Sure," Pat was serene. "And right now he's wondering exactly who we are and just how much you might have talked. Well, he can set his mind at rest, and so can you. If we all never opened our lips to the crocs and bad eggs, Morgan, this would be a lonely world." His eyes strayed to Sam and Ezra irresistibly as he concluded, and Sloane's hackles began to rise at once. "Well, suppose you just make it clear what you mean by that last part there, Stevens," he brought out. Spreading his hands, Pat winked at Ray. "Well, you see what a guilty conscience can do to you, eh?" he whispered to Ray. "All those there 2 got to do is hear the word crook mentioned somewhere in the next county, and they just turn around and yell, 'It's not me,' at the top of their voices." Morgan laughed a little distractedly. "Well, that was really aimed at me, I suppose," he said ruefully. "Not that I blame you a lot, but I'm learning fast." He broke off and stirred the fire thoughtfully. "What do you figure the next move is, Stevens?" "Well, I no longer approve of this place overly much for some reason," Pat said practically. "It's too apt to prove popular, and don't forget that Taggart's got the money at his command to pay for information in this country." He put a few more tense questions about and probing the extent of Morgan's knowledge. It's plain enough that Redstone is an outlaw hangout, he summed up finally, but not where they do their fast work. I'm in favor of heading back for Bluestem without much loss of time. Now that we know plenty goes on out here, we can afford to wait a day or two for it. You mean you'd help me get the dead wood on Taggart and his crew? Ray found it hard to go on. It's me that stands to gain from this deal if I can jam it through, Stevens, and I don't need to remind you. Ezra and Sam laughed at him. Oh, a steer off old Pat Stevens' range is just as expensive as any boy, Ezra scoffed. Just do your own share to help us pin down them long-legged galoots, and we'll make out to collect our own profit one way or another. Morgan, then content to let her stand that way, turned to get up his horse. End of chapter 11.